You wouldn't believe what happened when our nosy HOA decided my small outdoor pool was a violation of their neighborhood aesthetic. One day I was relaxing with a lemonade, watching my niece and nephew splash around in the little pool I had built just for them. Nothing fancy, just a modest setup with a few chairs, some string lights, and a small fountain. The next morning, I found a bright orange notice taped to my front door, stamped with bold letters. Immediate removal required. I laughed at first, thinking it was a mistake. But then I saw Karen standing at the edge of my lawn, arms folded, that smug look on her face as she took pictures with her phone. I should have known. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA, had it out for me ever since I moved into the neighborhood last year. Maybe it was because I didn't attend her mandatory community wine tastings. Or maybe because I'm the county sheriff and she hated not being the most powerful person on the block. Either way, she didn't waste a second before declaring my pool an unsanctioned body of water. Her words, not mine. I checked the bylaws, and sure enough, the section she cited was vague, intentionally vague. Something about water features disrupting the visual uniformity of the subdivision. I'd already gotten permits from the city. I had safety fencing installed, but Karen wasn't having it. She called an emergency HOA meeting without even notifying me and voted, alongside her two loyal sidekicks, to fine me daily until the pool was removed. I appealed. I sent emails. I offered to make modifications. I even invited Karen over to see that the pool wasn't some obnoxious eyesore. She refused. Then, a week later, while I was on duty and my brother was watching the kids, a work crew showed up and started dismantling my pool. No warning, no court order, just a smug little letter dropped in my mailbox saying the HOA has exercised its right to enforce compliance. That was the last straw. I may wear a badge, but I'm also an uncle who promised his family a place to laugh, cool off, and be happy in our own backyard. That night, as I stared at the muddy hole where the pool used to be, a plan formed in my mind. If they thought a small pool was disruptive, wait till they saw what I was going to do next. I made a few calls, pulled a few strings, and set the wheels in motion. You see, as sheriff, I've dealt with enough red tape to know where all the loopholes live. And the one thing Karen forgot was that while the HOA has jurisdiction over appearances, they can't override state zoning laws, especially when it comes to temporary recreational installations for private events. It was right there in the legal code. I bookmarked it. For the next 2 weeks, my backyard became a construction zone. But this time it was different. I filed everything by the book: permits, safety inspections, zoning clearance. Meanwhile, I had large privacy screens installed around the backyard, so nosy eyes couldn't see what was coming. Trucks rolled in carrying water slides, splash pads, inflatable obstacle courses, and even a dunk tank. My friend Todd, who owns a landscaping company, helped me level the ground and install artificial turf. My cousin brought over a massive tiki bar setup from his catering business. I had music speakers hidden in the bushes and colorful LED lighting run through the trees. Neighbors peeked through their blinds. Some whispered. Karen marched past every day with her little clipboard, glaring at the sound of drills and laughter. But there was nothing she could do yet. The day before the grand opening, I sent flyers to every house in the neighborhood. Come cool off at the biggest backyard water park this town has ever seen. One day only. Sheriff's Backyard Bash. Family friendly. Snacks provided. All ages welcome. I didn't mention Karen or the HOA. I didn't need to. The next afternoon, the gates to my backyard swung open, and the crowd poured in. Over 100 people came, more than half the neighborhood. Kids in swimsuits squealed as they slid down the towering blue slide that twisted like a serpent. The shallow wading pool was packed with toddlers while the bigger kids raced across floating pads to reach the splash cannons. The dunk tank had a line around the corner, and everyone laughed when I took a seat and let people throw balls to drop me in. I even set up a quiet, shady corner with fans and drinks for the older folks to relax and enjoy the scene. Then, right when everything was perfect, the music pumping, the burgers sizzling, and the kids screaming with joy, Karen stormed in through the side gate, dragging 2 HOA board members behind her like hostages. She had papers in her hand, eyes locked on me like I'd just committed treason. I was standing by the cotton candy machine when I noticed her. I wiped my hands and walked over, smiling. Before she could open her mouth, I pulled out a laminated copy of my permit, zoning approval, and legal exemptions. State Code Section 17B, I said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. Temporary recreational structures for private, non-commercial use are not under HOA jurisdiction. Karen's face turned redder than the cherry snow cones we were serving. She tried to argue, waving her paper like it was some magic spell. But it was over. I had done everything by the book, and the whole neighborhood had seen it. That's when the best part happened. My deputy arrived with a police drone to record aerial footage for our department's social media. The camera hovered above, capturing the colorful chaos of my backyard-turned-water-park. The footage was uploaded that evening with the caption, "A splash of summer joy courtesy of our very own sheriff." It went viral overnight. The next morning, I woke up to find 3 news vans parked along the curb and a local reporter standing in front of my house with a microphone in hand. Word about the backyard water park had spread fast, faster than I expected. My phone had nearly exploded overnight with texts, calls, and social media tags. Even the mayor had messaged me laughing, saying it was the most excitement our sleepy town had seen in years. I poured myself a coffee and stepped onto the porch, nodding at the reporter, who quickly began rehearsing her segment. Across the street, Karen stood frozen on her porch, arms crossed, eyes locked on the media circus unfolding in front of her. She was clearly fuming. She hadn't just lost control. She had become the laughingstock of the neighborhood. She ruled like a petty dictator. But I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Karen wasn't the type to walk away quietly. And sure enough, that afternoon, I got a letter slid under my door. No envelope, just a single sheet of paper printed in bold. It read, "The HOA is opening a formal investigation into the illegal use of property for commercial gain." I laughed out loud. Commercial gain? I hadn't charged a single penny. It was a free event for the community, fully permitted and clearly protected under state recreational use laws. But Karen was desperate. She lost her grip on the one thing she valued most: control. Later that day, I visited City Hall and spoke with the zoning officer who had signed off on my project. He was already aware of the HOA complaint and had received a long-winded email from Karen full of exaggerated claims and legal threats. He rolled his eyes as he showed it to me. "She's grasping at straws," he said, pointing to a highlighted section where Karen accused me of operating an amusement park. The officer confirmed that not only was I within my rights, but the city appreciated how I'd brought positive attention to the community. He even hinted that the mayor wanted to propose a new summer program modeled after what I had done. I walked out of City Hall with a smile on my face and an idea forming in my head. If Karen wanted to paint me as some rogue outlaw running a rogue water park, I might as well make it official on a much bigger scale. I called in a few favors. One of my childhood friends, Jake, worked for a nonprofit that focused on building accessible recreational spaces in underfunded towns. Another friend had connections in the local school district. Within a few days, I secured a temporary partnership between my department and the city to host community water days every Saturday during summer. It was approved as a public outreach initiative, funded by donations and supported by city officials. And since I was still hosting it on my private property, there was no need to involve HOA approvals. I had taken something personal and turned it into a public movement. And the best part? I wasn't alone anymore. Neighbors who once stayed silent about Karen's antics now stopped by to thank me. They shared their own stories, of letters demanding they paint their door a different shade, of fines for parking in their own driveway, of threats for planting unapproved flowers. One elderly couple admitted they were too scared to install a small garden bench for fear of Karen's wrath. But now, the tide was turning. Karen tried everything to stop it. She filed noise complaints. She staged emergency HOA meetings. She even hired a private inspector to look for safety hazards in my yard. But each time, she was met with a wall of legality I had carefully constructed. And the community? They'd had enough. At the next HOA meeting, over 50 residents showed up, more than the HOA had ever seen. Karen tried to hold the meeting in her usual domineering style, but this time people pushed back. Questions were asked. Records were requested. Her allies squirmed in their seats. Someone even demanded to see financial reports from the last 5 years. That's when things got interesting. A quiet man from the back stood up and handed out copies of documents he'd acquired through a public records request. They showed suspicious payments from HOA funds to a private landscaping company, Karen's brother-in-law's company, to be exact. Gasps filled the room. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. By the end of that meeting, a motion was introduced to hold a vote of no confidence. It passed, not by a slim margin, but unanimously. Karen was removed as HOA president on the spot. She tried to argue that the bylaws didn't allow such a vote, but the community had brought in a lawyer who confirmed that with a majority present, it was completely within their rights. Karen stood there, stunned, clutching her folder of violations like it was a lifeline. But it was over. For the first time in years, the neighborhood took back its voice. The very next day, I received an official apology letter signed by the interim HOA board, acknowledging the wrongful removal of my pool and the harassment I had endured. They also offered funding to rebuild the original pool, but I declined. I had bigger plans now. The water park wasn't just a backyard stunt anymore. It had become a symbol, a reminder that no one should be bullied in their own home, especially not by someone hiding behind community rules. With summer in full swing, I expanded the setup. More slides were added, a splash tunnel, even a small lazy river with inner tubes donated by a local hardware store. Families came from across town. The laughter never stopped. And Karen? She stayed hidden in her house, blinds drawn, ignored and forgotten that a few weeks passed, and what started as a rebellion against petty rules transformed into something much bigger. The backyard water park became a weekend tradition, with families showing up early to grab their favorite spots and kids racing to be the first on the giant slides. Local food trucks started parking near my driveway, offering lemonade, hot dogs, and cotton candy. A nearby high school band volunteered to play on Saturdays, turning the afternoons into mini festivals. It wasn't just fun, it was unity. People who had lived on the same street for years, but never exchanged more than a wave were now planning potlucks and forming cleanup crews. Even the mayor stopped by with his grandkids one weekend, snapping photos and shaking hands with families. The city began to take notice in a big way. I was invited to speak at a town hall about community engagement and how neighborhoods could build stronger bonds through inclusive spaces. The irony wasn't lost on me. What began with a forbidden pool had become the heart of a neighborhood revival. But just as everything felt perfect, another storm was brewing. One morning, as I was cleaning up leftover pool noodles and deflated floaties, I received an envelope from the county zoning board. Inside was a formal notice. Someone had filed a complaint claiming that my water park posed a liability risk to surrounding properties. My heart sank. I had followed every rule, every permit, every safety guideline. But whoever filed this had gone higher than the HOA. I didn't even have to guess who it was. Karen might have been ousted, but she wasn't done. I learned that she had contacted a state-level agency and presented her case as a concerned resident, arguing that my weekly gatherings could cause property damage, invite strangers, and reduce home values. She even went as far as to cite irrelevant ordinances about commercial construction and building code violations. The new HOA board was quick to denounce her actions, but the county couldn't ignore an official complaint. An investigation was opened, and I was told to temporarily suspend all events until a review was completed. The silence that followed was almost eerie. My backyard, once filled with laughter and splashes, now sat empty. The water slides were deflated, the snack tables folded away, the music silent. Children passed by on their bikes, slowing down to peek in with disappointed faces. I spent the next few days preparing my defense. I compiled every permit, documented every safety check, gathered written support from neighbors, and even collected photos and videos from families who had enjoyed the events. More than a dozen neighbors offered to write statements. The parents formed a group and started a petition. Within 2 days, over 300 signatures were collected, not just from within the neighborhood, but from across town. Karen had tried to take away our community again, but this time she underestimated just how much we had grown together. The The review meeting was held at the county building. I walked in wearing my sheriff's uniform, not to intimidate, but to remind them I wasn't just a homeowner. I was someone who had dedicated their life to keeping this town safe and thriving. The review board, composed of 5 officials, listened carefully as I laid out my case. I showed them maps, permits, inspection reports, and the pile of support letters I had received. Then I played a short video montage, neighbors laughing, kids playing, elderly couples sitting under umbrellas. No politics, no drama, just joy. When the lights came back on, the room was silent. The board members looked at each other, flipped through some of the letters, and finally spoke. One by one, they expressed appreciation for how the event had brought the community together, especially after years of pandemic isolation and rising social tension. The board voted unanimously to allow the Waterpark events to resume, with a special exemption granted under community health and outreach initiatives. I walked out of that building with my head high, but the best part was calling the neighborhood parents group to share the news. That weekend, the Waterpark was back, and bigger than ever. But Karen wasn't done just yet. The day after the reopening, a news story broke involving a local property dispute case. As I sipped coffee and scrolled through my phone, I nearly choked when I saw her name in the headline. It turned out, during her reign as HOA president, Karen had sold access rights to a greenbelt area behind her property, which technically belonged to the HOA. She pocketed thousands in maintenance fees that never showed up in any financial report. A whistleblower, none other than her former board secretary, leaked the documents after watching her continue to stir trouble. The story went viral across town. Reporters swarmed her house. Investigators opened a case. She was soon facing charges for financial misconduct and misuse of community funds. What made it worse for her was the fact that so many people had already begun sharing their own complaints online. Homeowners from her previous neighborhoods started coming forward with similar stories. Fake fines, forced removals, secret spending. Her name became synonymous with HOA corruption. Meanwhile, my neighborhood felt lighter, like a heavy fog had lifted. The new HOA board announced they would revise all community guidelines, this time with open forums and transparent votes. They also created a subcommittee focused on community events, inviting me to chair it. I accepted, not because I wanted more power, but because I had seen firsthand what could happen when good people stayed silent. The backyard water park wasn't just about fun. It had become a symbol of resistance, unity, and the kind of community we all wanted to live in. On the following Saturday, the crowd was bigger than ever. A local musician played live. Kids from the high school drama club volunteered as lifeguards, and a team of volunteers handed out sunscreen and popsicles. I stood at the edge of the pool, watching it all unfold, and for a brief moment, everything felt right in the world again. By the time the summer was winding down, the once quiet suburban street had become something of a legend across the county. News crews still passed through from time to time, hoping to catch the latest update on what everyone was now calling the Sheriff's Waterpark. Local papers had covered it as a feature on Civic Pride. Social media posts flooded with smiling faces and water splash selfies turned the story into an online phenomenon. I even got invited to speak at a state-level municipal leadership conference, not because I was a sheriff, but because I had managed to transform a neighborhood dispute into a full-blown civic movement. And yet, with all the attention, the best part was still the way the community had changed. Families who had once lived in isolation now gathered regularly. Elderly neighbors received help with groceries and yard work from teens they used to be afraid of. The HOA office, once a dreaded place of fines and cold notices, had been renovated and repurposed into a welcoming center with flowers in the windows and flyers for upcoming community picnics. One afternoon, as I walked around the block with my dog, I noticed something that made me stop. A new family had moved into Karen's old house. Their youngest child waved at me from the driveway, while their mother hung string lights along the porch railing. But what caught my eye was the sound of drilling from the backyard. I peeked past the gate and saw the frame of a modest above-ground pool being set up. A permit was clearly taped to the fence. No hiding, no fear, just a family doing what families should be able to do. I smiled and kept walking, but inside I felt something settle. That house, once the headquarters of control and intimidation, had become a home again. No one protested. No notices appeared. Just neighbors who had learned to respect each other, finally allowed to live in peace. It wasn't long after that when I received a letter from the governor's office. I'd been nominated for a civic leadership award based on community impact. My first reaction was disbelief. I didn't set out to change the world. I just wanted to keep a promise to my niece and nephew that they'd always have a place to play freely. But sometimes, standing your ground opens doors you never imagined. The award ceremony was simple, held at the town hall, with neighbors in attendance and the mayor giving a short but heartfelt speech. He talked about courage, not just the kind you need to wear a badge, but the kind it takes to stand up to everyday injustice, to challenge the small tyrannies that make people feel powerless in their own homes. When he handed me the plaque, I didn't think about the viral videos, the news coverage, or the permits. I thought about that first day I saw the empty hole in the ground where my little pool used to be, and how that one act of destruction sparked something much greater than Karen could have ever imagined. Karen, by then, had quietly moved to another town. Word had it she tried joining another HOA, but her reputation followed her. No one wanted her in charge again. Her house was sold off at a loss, and the garden she once micromanaged had been replaced with an open vegetable bed where local kids helped plant tomatoes and basil. I heard rumors she filed a defamation suit against the news outlet that exposed her finances, but it never went anywhere. Her name faded from neighborhood conversations, replaced by talk of the next barbecue or the community mural being painted on the HOA wall. By autumn, the water park was partially dismantled to prepare for colder weather, but plans were already in motion to build a winter festival space. The same kids who splashed through the slides in July were now helping string lights and build snowman cutouts for the upcoming community event. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was cultural. The neighborhood had evolved from a collection of isolated homes under silent tension to a breathing, vibrant community. And all of it, in some strange way, was thanks to one bold act of pettiness from a woman who thought she could bully people with bylaws. One evening, as golden leaves floated down onto the quiet streets, I sat in the backyard, now quiet and peaceful again, and reflected on everything that had unfolded. From a moment that first notice was taped to my door to the final cheer of a reunited community, the journey had been wild, frustrating, empowering, and strangely beautiful. What started as a fight for a pool became a symbol for standing up against the small injustices that often go unchecked. I wasn't a hero. I was just someone who refused to be intimidated in my own home. And if there was one thing I learned through all of it, it was this. Sometimes the best way to take down the walls people build around you is to open the gates and invite everyone in for a splash. The water park may fade with the season, but the spirit it sparked, that won't be going anywhere.